Mr. Ajulo, you are one of those who have, at certain times, different times, talked about the need to cut down the cost of running government. And now, setting up another commission, wouldn't that be increasing the burden on government?
Well, thank you very much. You know, when it comes to cutting costs, you find out that we have a lot of loopholes in government. We have a lot of agency that we find out that they are not doing anything. That is not what we are talking about here. We are talking about regulation. We are talking about regulating the space. We are talking about fixing things right. Let me tell you one thing, and these are the things we do not understand. I know those who are against the bill keep on raising the issue of Corporate Affairs Commission. And I think they need to know this. When it comes to Corporate Affairs Commission, the ambit, whatever Corporate Affairs is doing is within the administrative law. Whereas, and I wish Victoria will understand this very well, that there is difference between administrative law and regulatory law. But when it comes to this bill we are talking about, the commission, what it needs to do is to regulate. Corporate affairs is all about administration, that is registration and management. Let me give you an example so for you to know. Today's corporate affairs requires you that for you to have your company, you must make annual return. But there are some other things within when you are running the company that corporate affairs has nothing to do with it. Corporate affairs has nothing to do with your ethics, how you run the company ethically. Then again, the corporate affairs has nothing to do with the texture, the insider dealing. But when you have a regulator, like for example, I mentioned the issue of banks. Banks are registered by Corporate Affairs Commission, but when it comes to know what actually that goes with the inside the bank, you see the central bank having all their monitoring, licensing and co. The same thing with NAFDAC. Now, like I mentioned earlier, so these are the things we are saying. Even teachers, universities, all of them, they have those that regulates them. Then the question is, how come?
Mr. Ajulo, when you were talking, you were trying to differentiate between regulation and administration. Let's look at this, for instance, the doctrine of lifting of the veil. If there's a financial misappropriation, it says that there's no barrier, everybody gets involved and all of that. So that doctrine of the veil, of lifting of the veil, would you consider that regulation or administration?
Well, one thing we have to know is this: when it comes to that, it depends on the agency of government that are trying to lift the bill, and particularly when there are some things that are very technical. When it comes to technicality of it, the question now you are going to ask me is that let's assume that we don't have central bank. Now to lift the veil of the bankers, and if we allowed the CAC to do that, how possible would that we have to be? Then we raise the issue of administrative and regulatory. You know, when it comes to the administrative, you find out that it is the legislator that always make a law to that effect. But when it comes to regulatory, it always comes from the government, that is the executive arm of government, or through a subsidiary legislation. Now, we are in the public, I think, I don't have to be technical. Let me just give you a very good example of what I'm trying to say for you to understand. Today, we have INEC registering and managing political parties. And that is why you remember there was this case law where the court raised that there are some things that are internal affair of the party that there's nothing anybody can do about it. That one is within, and that's why you see today we have IPAC. And the IPAC, that's the Inter-Party Advisory Council. You see that they look at the issue, basically issue of ethics, issue of the value, and the internal affair of the party, and how they relate, and the output to the people. And that's why you see that each of the aspects of this organization, like NGOs, they always have their own. Like, for example, NCE, that's National Society of Engineers, within themselves, they have a regulator that regulates them. The MBAs, we have a mechanism that regulates all the lawyers. If I should fall short of the law, even not the law, even we're talking of professional ethics, the disciplinary committee will have a way out to go and about to deal with me. This is what we are saying. the position of CAC is very different. And the position of regulator, they are always different. See, all this is required to do is that every year you have to bring annual return. Whatsoever you write in the annual return, CAC has nothing to do with it. But when you have a regulator, the regulator will go even behind the books. We find out what happened to really find out what you are saying. So that's why you see that if anybody should not talk of the provocation of different agency, the agency has different things. Administrative agency is different from regulatory agency, and that is why we believe that it is imperative that we have this regulative agency, a commission to regulate the NGOs.
Okay, Mr. Ajilo, if there is any part of that bill that you think should be worked on, what should it be for you? Or what would it be for you? Well,
thank you very much. You know, I raised something at the public hearing that instead of everybody saying, no, we don't have this bill, what we're supposed to do, and the purpose of having public hearing is to pick the bills section by section, words for words. We don't need this, we don't need that. The question is this, and when you look at the total aggregate of all the complaint that's created against the bill, is to the effect that this is a way for government to stifle NGOs from performing its aims and objectives to the people. And I see that this is something that I believe we need to discuss about. But for example, in a situation where you mentioned that those that we man the commission, we can easily ask that instead for the president, if you believe you don't want to trust your president, what stops us from looking for somewhere else to say, oh, you must appoint? For example, today we have this public complaint commission. Today you find out that today is National Assembly even superintending that public complaint commission, not even the presidency. Okay? The same thing, if you believe that you don't trust this, we can. Like the likes of my brother and my senior Falana, the likes of them, we can say, oh, we want one of you to really look for a way and to superintend this commission. Not that we will say we raise the issue that we don't want the commission again. And apart from that, I want a situation that where we have a conglomerate of the NGOs. Let us have a body of NGOs that will come together. Like NCE, they are regulating themselves. They need to come together to say, oh, when it comes to the issue of regulation, we will have a body, whatever name you call it, of all the NGOs claiming Wako, Falana, and even if possible, if Victoria should be there, then we'll sit down together, we now draw and to say, oh, we will superintend this commission. But to say we don't want the commission, you don't want the bill, you don't want any regulation, it is against good conscience and justice.
Mr. Benson, yes. Mr. Ajilo has talked about part of the reasons why this bill should be looked at, and then with a few adjustments. One of the things you say is about financial accountability. But there's a special control unit on money laundering affiliated with the EFCC. You are the one that mentioned the EFCC. Don't you think this is like duplicating functions here?
Yes, like I said earlier again, it's I believe it's a one-stop shop. One-stop shop.
This bill is a one-stop shop.
Yeah, it's a one-stop shop. It's
so you collapse everything else into this?
Into one, and it makes things more efficient. Like I said earlier, the NGOs provide a lot of critical value into the Nigerian space. So we need to ensure that we put them together appropriately so that the foreign donors look at them critically and invest more. And like I said earlier again, it's best practice. If you go to most countries, they have a commission that regulates their NGOs. And my sister said earlier that the DFIDs of this world come to Nigeria and do annual reports and supervise things. That's because they have a regulatory authority in their host country or in their home country that mandates them to do that. Asking us to set up a commission, I don't think we're asking for too much. I believe that the content of the bill should be looked at critically with the stakeholders.
But there was something else you mentioned, which you have not addressed. She talked about the fact that the diversion of the donor funds and issues have all had to do with government officials or government agencies. Are they part of this, of what the commission will be monitoring?
Yes, that's right. An independent commission that will work appropriately.
But will be appointed by the president?
No. You see, I said all the clauses. I don't agree with all the clauses in the bill. And that is one. They're appointing authority can be moved away and put out, maybe a consultancy firm should headhunt and appoint the head of the agency. On finance, some people are saying you're creating more bureaucracy. I expect them to sit down and say, you know what, one of our donor agencies will finance all this. You know, it's making the space clearer and more workable for everyone, more transparent. And they have those resources. They have the DFIDs. They have a lot of donor agencies that work with them that will easily take up the tab of setting up this commission.